Hey everyone, you are here on Litvak Leadership Live, and I am here with our guest today, Dennis Mossburg. But before I introduce Dennis, I want to remind everyone that if you have not subscribed to Litvak Leadership Live on Facebook or YouTube, please go ahead and do that so you can be notified of our broadcasts every single time we have one. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to Dennis Mossburg, the author of Reflections on Leadership, available at Amazon and hopefully a bookstore near you and other virtual bookstores. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sean.
So you've got a rather unique niche within leadership that when I was looking at the reviews of your book and what the book was about, more appropriately stated, that it's more of a historical reflection on leadership.
Absolutely. So I was looking at, I earned a master's in management and leadership, and I read what all the academics said about leadership, and I wanted to find out what history's leaders said about leadership. So I started looking at some of their quotes. And so the book is basically some of their quotes, and then how I tie what they're saying and from their time frame into current leadership theory and thought process. And really what they're saying isn't anything new, obviously, and it pretty much ties in with what we're teaching today. People just think that this is something brand new, and I found their perspectives kind of interesting in how I tied them in.
So yeah, when we were in the pre-show, we were talking about how there really isn't anything new under the sun with leadership, I guess, other than my show, Litvak Leadership, and we're doing a live stream as opposed to yelling from mountain to mountain. But when you look at leadership, so was there an emphasis in the past on emotional intelligence? I'm curious about that.
You wouldn't see it packaged quite as emotional intelligence, but you would see leaders trying to figure out what they had to do to get their followers to do what they what needed to be done. So, and sometimes you would see that there's one quote in here, if I can find it. He said, let's see, page 56. So he was saying, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast, endless sea. And he's French. I'm going to screw up his name, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. So what he's talking about there is not just bossing people around and telling them do this, do that, but tap into their desires and their needs and what they're already looking for and make that in line with their mission. So
kind of like a carrot.
Right.
In front of the hole.
It is a carrot. Make them want to have it too. And to get to the emotional intelligence component, in order to understand what your people want, you have to be able to connect with them emotionally, intelligently. It's not just barking things. It's forming the vision that they can understand, that they're willing to accept, and that they'll follow.
You know, one of the areas that, looking back on my own history, where I've been weakest in leadership is actually getting to know my team on a personal level, because I've always been uncomfortable with the personal interaction as opposed to a professional interaction. Because, you know, what if you have to terminate someone someday and, you know, you formed a bond with them? How did leaders handle that in the past?
Well, hopefully if you've built your relationship with them, then you've done your training with them, and you shouldn't hopefully have to fire them because you've already built that relationship in that training environment. I have There's a couple of quotes that talk about that. Lao Tzu, for example, one of his quotes is, let me find it real quick here. A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves. So that's the same kind of thing. Your people don't get to that point unless you spend time with them, building relationships and conducting the training and getting them to that point that they're autonomous. And all they need to do is check in with you for what the military calls commander's intent. I struggle with that relationship building part too. I'm an introvert, very classic introvert. And I found building connections with people difficult. One day, one of my classic stories, and I think it's in the book here, I went to talk to one of my staff members, one of my followers, and it was partway through the shift, but I hadn't seen him yet. So I walk up to him and I just start giving him directions. And I could see the look on their face that I've done something wrong. Okay. Not sure what it is, but I've screwed it up.
Yeah. What have I done?
Yeah. Well, where, is my uniform clean? What's wrong? And then I realized, so I stopped mid-sentence. How you doing? How's the wife and kids? I start down that road, finding out some personal stuff. And we had a good conversation. And then when I realized, okay, I've done that part, now I can go on, and I started giving them the direction. At that point, things were smoothed out. So I've taken that lesson today. So now when I show up to work or see my coworkers, my first conversation with them is not about work. How was the weekend? How was whatever? How is so-and-so doing? And that has smoothed things out a lot. And it opens up that whole vulnerability thing that we keep hearing about. Being vulnerable as a leader doesn't mean, necessarily sitting in your office and crying all the time, but it's admitting that you have challenges and frustrations just like they do. And I know a lot of leaders want to have this wall where they don't talk about family. And you don't have to talk about family, but whatever your vulnerability looks like, let them see it. Like, I'm concerned about this next quarter, or these are the things I think we have to do to achieve our deliverables for this month. So
let me ask you about that. And I want to go to the introvert extrovert thing.
Right.
We'll go back to that in a minute. So being vulnerable as a leader. So, I guess I have always approached leadership from, I don't necessarily have to have the answers, but I have to have the vision. Absolutely. And when my team would say, oh, I'm worried about that, I guess I just had it drummed in me. I was like, don't be worried. This is an opportunity for us to shine, which made them want to puke in a bag after they've heard me say it for the 1,000th time.
Right.
But I would rather, act as though everything is cool. We're figuring it out. We're forging ahead, as opposed to going, boy, I'm worried about this quarter. Am I wrong? To me, that's just like, it is showing weakness and concern that will not engender people to forge ahead.
So you're not wrong. Leaders have to maintain that level of confidence, because otherwise people aren't going to follow you.
Okay.
It's okay, though, to go to your group and say, hey, the numbers for this quarter aren't looking great. What are your ideas for making this better? We can get through this. I know we will, but here's an area of concern that we need to pick up. It's the confidence that you'll find a solution, not the fear or vulnerability running around saying the sky is falling. You can be vulnerable and still portray that confidence. It's just how you present it to your staff, your followers. By all means, don't run around with your arms flailing in the air saying the sky is falling. Saying, hey, here's our issue. How do we solve it? And additionally, by taking it to them and getting their ideas, you start getting the buy-in, you start creating the plans, and they're going to want to carry out their plans more than they're going to want to carry out your plans. So if you start carrying out their plans, the fact that you show confidence in their plan helps build that relationship again. It shows that level of vulnerability is that, no, we don't have to absolutely do my plan every time. I'm willing to work with you and come up with a plan to help. I think there's too many leaders out there who think that vulnerability means crying in the corner,
Oh yeah.
talking about all of your concerns.
Oh yeah.
That's not necessarily what it is.
I don't like
Go in,
that.
go in and admit that you don't know something, but then work with them to find the solution.
Well, and I think about the was it the movie Crimson Tide with Denzel Washington and who is that great?
Yeah.
He was in Hoosiers.
Yeah.
You know who? Gene Hackman.
Gene Hackman,
So,
absolutely.
Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman in Crimson Tide. Matter of fact, wrong submarine movie. There's another submarine movie with Matthew. We watch a lot of submarine movies.
I guess, yeah.
Okay. There's a movie with Matthew McConaughey.
Okay.
Right, where he ends up after the captain ends up dying. This is during World War II because the German sub has hit them and done damage, and he suddenly becomes the captain of this submarine. And he was telling his crew, I don't know what we're going to do. We'll figure it out, but I don't know either. I am very concerned. And after his executive staff left him, the one advisor sat there and he looked at him. He goes, do you have something to say? And he goes, yeah, you're the captain of the ship.
Yeah.
You don't have the luxury of saying, I don't know.
Right.
And we're in a bad situation. So,
right.
and like you said, I think a lot of leaders today think that to make themselves approachable, they have to, I'm calling it portraying weakness.
Right.
What would you call it? Is it over vulnerability?
Yeah, I think there's some betrayal in there. I remember one of my leaders, I used to work in a prison, and so we would have an emergency, and this leader would get on the radio during the emergency and intentionally add some edge to the voice so you knew this was an emergency. But that was completely the wrong approach because you sound like you don't know what you're doing. When instead, the best approach is steady, calm. Hey, we're in an emergency here, but I'm calm. I'm cool as a cucumber. And that comes across to the staff. So at the same time, you're still gathering information and trying to come up with your plan, but you still sound calm. And I think a lot of leaders, they're trying to put some of that vulnerability in there so you know that they understand and feel you. But I tell you, your staff appreciate the calmness in your voice and they feed off of that. So even if you don't know exactly what you're doing, sound calm and confident in not knowing what you're doing. Even if you don't know what you're doing for a certain situation, you could still know where your vision and mission and commander's intent are. You just have to kind of guide them and get their input to that point.
I mean, in my experience leading people, and I am by no means saying that I did it right 100% of that time, because there were lots of people that found me difficult as a leader. But there's others that have said to me that, you may be a pain to me, Sean, but at the same time, I know exactly what you want.
Yeah.
I don't have to try to read your mind. You just lay it out there. Let's roll back a second, because you said something really interesting.
Okay.
That as a classic introvert, it is difficult, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, for you to connect with people or form root. I'm going to say, now I'm putting words in, deeper relationships. Right. Okay. And as a reformed, raging extrovert, okay, I think you and I are on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right, that's fair.
I have found it difficult to create meaningful relationships with people. I can walk into a room and know everybody within half an hour.
Right.
and have people enjoy my company and tell jokes and do all that. But when it comes to an actual relationship, that's where it gets difficult, because I'm more comfortable with a crowd. I would think that an introvert would be more comfortable one-on-one with people, because that's a classic introvert, and be able to build a relationship. So talk about that for a minute.
So what you talked about is typical introvert jealousy. I see you at the party. It's like, how is this guy connecting with all these people?
I'm not.
But
I'm not.
so an introvert's strength is that because we don't want to talk or know what to say or how to have conversations, we become really good at listening and asking questions, and we read body language really well. So we go into that same crowd, and I see the people around you talking, and I'm thinking, that guy and that guy, they're listening to him, but they don't really care anymore. They've kind of tuned out. So the difference is how we build the relationships. And I think you're right. We do tend to, because we're listeners and we read body language, we can kind of parse out what's really going on with the conversation. So later on, when I see whomever out on the street, I know I can pull up those details. Oh, we talked about your mom last time. How's your dog doing? So I think that's kind of the balance, is extroverts are really good at drawing the attention, kind of building those more shallow relationships, but with a larger group.
Yes.
But the introverts, be careful what you say to an introvert, because they're going to remember it 10 years later. And at some point, they're going to mention it to you.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just kind of the dynamic. But the big difference for me is I would spend 8 hours, leading people, or 8 hours teaching a class, or 8 hours being on, and I would go home completely exhausted and just needing time, not to do anything, just sit there and self-reflect or read a book. Whereas you were probably energized by all that activity, and after work you would like, yeah, let's go, do this, or let's go out on the town. That's the big difference. Is for me, when I do it, it's exhausting, and I just need to go someplace and hide for a while.
Oh, and my wife and my daughter are introverts, and my son is an extrovert. So, I have been there where I'm like, all right, we've had a great day. Let's go do this now. And no, I want to just go home and be quiet. I'm like, why?
My wife is a classic extrovert. So during all of this COVID, I've been out deployed doing things. I really haven't stopped traveling. I'm still going out and doing things, doing my job. She's been, spending most of her time at home. So on the weekends, especially, I get home and all I want to do is just relax. But she's like, I've been cooped up in the house all weekend. So I totally see what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to find that balance. And it's really taken effort on both of our parts to figure that out, that relationship. And I'm sure that you're experiencing the same thing.
And truly, when people ask, because everyone, well, at least the circle I run in, asks, what have you learned during the pandemic?
Yeah.
I've learned how to stream. I've learned how to listen.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned how to read books,
right,
and not just read the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it as an opportunity for self-improvement, as opposed to waiting around for normal to come back.
Right.
What about you?
Well, whatever normal is going to look like, it's not going to be what it was before.
You are correct.
There have been so many societal changes, so many organizations that were against remote work and virtual work have bought into it and found the value. But some of the things I've learned is a lot like you. I want to read more, although I did read a lot. But I found that even though I'm an introvert and I really haven't, before this, I would have told you I don't need much human connection. Shaking hands. Okay, I'll shake your hands, but can we do this at a distance? We're definitely not hugging. But even though I'm that way, I'm missing that human connection. Like,
oh, sure.
People want to shake hands. They want to hug. Yeah, great. Let's do more of this thing that I thought I didn't need. So, I wanted, in the past, being quarantined at home for 2 months would have been a dream. But now it's like, I need that human connection. And that's kind of a surprise to, an introvert, to realize that there still is that small marginal need for that kind of human interaction.
Well, and we've all seen the cartoon, and I'm not referring to anyone in particular because I've seen so many of them where it's an introvert saying, "I've been preparing for this my entire life."
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You extroverts have an issue. I'm ready for this.
Well, and that's the way I was at the beginning of this. It was like, oh, social distancing. I've been doing this forever. You guys are all amateurs at this. But now it's like, hey, come on, a little bit closer, a little bit closer. It's funny what you'll miss when you think that, your life would be perfect. It kind of reminds me of that Twilight Zone where Burgess Meredith is a reader, and then the nuclear war happens, and he makes it to the library thinking now he's got the rest of his life just to read books, but his glasses are broken. So, yeah. So you don't really know how much you're going to miss something until it's gone. And I think that's been a great lesson for a lot of people. I hear about people who are binge watching TV all the time and just, chilling in their house. It's like, same as you. You're missing a perfect opportunity to better yourself. Start that small business you've always wanted to start. Read all those books you want to start. Write that book you wanted to write. People really need to look at this as an opportunity. This is a great opportunity to build yourself and make yourself better.
So when you look at leaders throughout history, what value do you think, or what percentage of them do you think had a vibrant, faith-filled spiritual life where they had, where they looked to God for inspiration, as opposed to looking deep within themselves or to others?
Honestly, I think there's always going to be those who are looking at the Judeo-Christian God. But you'll find great leaders from every culture. The West doesn't have a monopoly on great leaders. There's plenty of them out there. I think if you had to boil it down, it's more like what Alcoholics Anonymous calls a higher power.
Okay.
There's something else out there, whatever name it goes by. There's something more out there than just what we're seeing here on Earth. And I don't. So from a Judeo-Christian perspective, I don't think that they were all that, but I think most of them had some faith in something other than themselves.
Interesting. So what do you think, after all your research and own personal growth, what do you think are some of the most important attributes of leadership?
Communication has got to be top of the list. Communication is the first thing that fails. I mentioned earlier that I work in prisons, or have in the past. I'm on an incident management team. We're the people you call when you have an earthquake, hurricane, volcano, and we try to set up the management system for those areas. So the first thing that always breaks down is communication. So you need to be able to communicate with your staff. That's not just the hi, how are you, do this job thing, but also means feedback. And oftentimes as leaders, we miss feedback horribly. They do a good job, we tell them good job. Well, good job at what? What exactly did I do that you liked? So as a leader, you need to be comfortable saying, hey, your presentation, I really loved your introduction, or whatever that looks like. And then we do a bad job on the negative feedback because we don't want to confront it. So the negative feedback builds up, or the negative behavior builds up over time. And as leaders, we get frustrated that this person hasn't changed their ways. Well, you haven't told them what they're doing wrong. So we need to, until usually at that point, it becomes a coaching issue, or, a letter of concern or reprimand, or getting close to termination. Well, you've let this person, you failed because you let this person do this behavior for a number of years until you finally couldn't handle it anymore. So as leaders, we need to work on both the positive and the constructive criticism or feedback. So that's one of the biggest things. And part of that communication not only includes all the feedback, but where are we going? What is your job? How many of your employees actually know what their job is? They think that their job is to fill out these TPS reports, when actually you didn't care about the TPS reports. You just wanted to know that the TPS report was telling you it was done. So having those conversations where you sit down with your staff and tell you, look, this is where I think your job needs to be. He says, oh, okay, I can see that. I can work on these objectives.
And feedback is so incredibly difficult to give, to receive.
Absolutely.
I had an HR colleague of mine that she would talk about having courageous conversations with people. I think any feedback that you're giving someone immediately qualifies as a courageous conversation.
Right. I think you're right, because we're so scared to have conversations about a lot of different things right now. There are so many, quote, taboo subjects right now that we're oftentimes afraid to talk about, your follower showing up to work late or turning in low quality work. We're just so afraid and gun shy of having debates and arguments. But if you learn how to couch your conversation, and this kind of comes back to some of the emotional intelligence you were talking about.
Yeah.
There's a good way to have the conversation. You're calling them all kinds of names and telling them that they keep screwing up probably isn't the best way to approach it, but saying, like, for example, Bob, this is the third day this month that you've shown up late. When you show up late, it puts everybody else behind on the program and on the schedule and on meetings. Is there some way that you can work with me and show up to work on time? That's a quick conversation. Shouldn't turn into any yelling matches. And if it does, that's an indication that maybe Bob isn't. I mean, if Bob's going to be really defensive about showing up for work all the time, that's probably an indication that there's something else going on. But
So let's look at that example for a second.
Okay,
so,
sure.
so the example you gave, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. You said, "Can you help me out here and show up for work on time?"
Right.
So I've had to learn how to say it that way because my natural inclination is on time is late. If you're walking in the door when you're supposed to start, if you're going to an appointment and that's when you're walking in, you're late.
Yep.
You should be there 10 minutes early at a minimum.
Yep.
Getting yourself organized so when the bell rings, whether it's metaphorically or actually, you're ready to go to work.
Right.
Why do you have to ask someone sweetly, is the way I, as a leader, to do what they're being paid to do, to show up?
So there's a couple ways to do it, a couple of reasons. Number one, that's a fairly non-threatening way to ask them. But your approach, coming to me saying, if you're on time, you're late, and blah blah blah, people don't really respond to that very well, even if they necessarily agree with you, because you're coming at them fairly strong. Number two, we don't know unless we've built our relationship with Bob, we don't know what's going on with his life. If we just take the hard as nails, be here at 8:00 or else approach, we probably haven't talked to Bob to find out that his mom is currently going through chemotherapy treatments and he's the only one able to take her to her treatments. So that kind of approach doesn't come out as attack, and it kind of opens that conversation. Who knows what Bob's going to say after that? He might tell you all sorts of things that's going on with his life that you really may not care for. You don't really care to know that information, but it does give you maybe some insight into why maybe this is just one sign. Bob being late is one sign, is the tip of the iceberg. Maybe his reports have been coming in late. Maybe his work product is bad. This is his opportunity to say, hey, this is what I've got going on in my life. And
so I think there's a certain level of accountability, I guess, is the approach that I'm looking at. And I hear what you're saying, and that makes total sense.
Right.
I think that we have given people passes
Mm-hmm.
to not communicate
Right.
when they have an issue that, okay, Bob needs to bring his mother to chemo
Right.
3 or 4 days a week, so he's going to be late.
Right.
Well, isn't there a certain responsibility on Bob
Oh, there absolutely is.
to go talk to whomever he reports to and says, hey, I got this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what it is. Here's how I'm suggesting we work through it. What do you think?
So you're absolutely right. Bob, that's incumbent upon Bob to tell you about the problems he's got coming up in his life. The problem is, as leaders, we think our relationship with our employees is one way, and the employees think it's totally different. I remember one conversation I had with one of my supervisors, actually a second level supervisor, and he said, hey, swing by my office in a little bit. Well, to me, that's one of the worst things to say. If you want to talk to me, let's do it now. Don't tell me, don't put this target out ahead of time and say, come
Oh, yeah.
So I said, well, do I need to bring anyone with me? Because I didn't know what was going on. This was, to me, an out of the blue thing. And he looked surprised. Well, he viewed our relationship vastly different. He's 2 levels above me in the chain of command. That's a very huge power disparity there. He was looking at me as, a friendly conversation, but because of his power, I was thinking something completely different.
Oh, sure.
And unfortunately, as leaders, we don't always recognize that there's this power differential in our staff. So yes, it's a good idea for Bob to come forward and tell you about what's going on in his life. But if he doesn't feel that he can approach you, then he's not going to come up and talk to you. I was recently at my organization. We were planning a funeral for a police officer.
Okay. And
it's morning, a couple of days in, and I noticed one of the people I'm working with, she's off. And this was a peer-to-peer situation, but I noticed that she was off. And I said, hey, you're doing this and this. What's going on? Well, she was having some family problem completely separate from what we were doing. But I could tell that she wasn't able to really focus on her work. So I took a couple minutes to talk to her about her family situation, talk back and forth a little bit, and then we were able to go back to work. Well, if I hadn't done that, and when she got back to work or went back to work, she was fine. I mean, she wasn't fine, but she was able to work at the level that we needed her to. But up until I had that conversation, she wasn't really able to focus on her job. So by taking that quick conversation, it freed her up to get some stuff off of her mind and be able to focus on her work. So I took a couple minutes to learn something personal about her outside of work related stuff, but it made her job performance better in doing that. And I think there are a lot of opportunities for leaders to do that in an organization where you think, well, I don't need to know about their family. You might want to learn a little bit. So that way, when you can see that something's off, you can interdict or intervene and maybe get their work performance from a pretty purely selfish standpoint. Maybe you get their work performance up just by taking that couple minutes.
Yeah, and so Michael brings up a good point as we look towards wrapping up. And I do have another question for you. You're going to be late, so can you work 10 to 7 instead of 8 to 5? Welcome to Flex World.
Yeah, absolutely. We're certainly in Flex World right now, aren't we? If your organization is willing to do that, and they're willing to do a lot of things right now, that's probably the best solution overall, because now Bob doesn't have to worry about facing you when he comes into work. He can take care of mom. So that's a great solution.
Absolutely. And Tim Lord from Boston Impressions, empathy is gold.
Yeah, absolutely.
Empathy is gold. So as we're at the 34-minute mark of a 30-minute show, but it goes so quick. That's why we do almost every day. So address the audience directly, those that are here now and those that are on replay, and give them your leadership tip that will make a difference as we close out the quarter this month.
My tip that will make the difference is to build those relationships with your staff. Communicate with them, find out what's going on with their life, find out what their stripping stones are, and then find out where they want to go. Because leaders are supposed to make people better. They're supposed to make new leaders. So build those relationships with your staff and actually communicate with them instead of just barking orders and finding out what their TPS reports are.
TPS, and one day I'll know what a TPS report is. Thank you, Dennis. That was what was great. You're so even keeled, and you've got like you said, classic introvert, and you've got a wealth of knowledge. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You bet. And everyone, that's Litvak Leadership Live for today. We'll be back tomorrow with another guest talking about leadership from another perspective. Everyone have a blessed